Episode 19. The Storm Ignited. Morning. The sky above Isvalon was dark, covered by thick clouds that signaled a storm on its way. However, a much greater storm had already arrived at the Isvalon palace, following the arrival of an unexpected package, something small, contained in a wooden box, wrapped in red cloth, seemed ordinary to those who did not recognize it. But for the high officials of Azfaran, this package brought a threat far greater than they could imagine. A box filled with insult, a symbol that tested their pride, and for King Azfaran, a challenge that could not be ignored. As the servant carefully opened the package, his eyes widened at the contents wrapped in cloth. A finger, neatly wrapped, with a golden ring encircling its tip, seemed to send a very clear message. Without a word, the servant carried it to the throne room, where King Azfaran sat upon his throne. The room was filled with silence, except for the hurried footsteps. King Azfaran stared at the object with eyes that began to show inner turmoil. Before him, the royal officials, including Zahil, the cunning advisor, stood waiting for his reaction. Zahil, with a faint, almost imperceptible smile, observed every movement of the king. He knew that once Azfaran reacted, everything would go according to his plan. Finally, King Azfaran took the finger roughly. His eyes widened, and his heart filled with hatred. "What is this?" His loud voice echoed in the room. He held the finger tightly, as if wanting to crush it. "What do they think of us? Of me? Of my child?" Zahil, the cunning advisor, standing not far from him, knew this was the moment to provoke further with words that would stir the king's anger. With a voice full of tone, Zahil spoke slowly. "King Azfaran, this is not just an insult to Riza. It is an insult to our entire kingdom. They dared to treat us like this. They think we are nothing more than a heap of trash. They want us to know that they feel superior." King Azfaran clenched a finger tighter, until its bones nearly cracked. His heart was filled with a rage that could not be contained. Riza, his manipulative daughter, who spread lies about those she disliked, had led him to even greater pain. "My daughter, Riza, they treat you like this." He reflected in silence, his voice silenced by the growing fury inside him. "This is an insult," King Zahil continued, his eyes shining with calculation. "There is nothing lower than this treatment. This is proof that they think we are weak, that they do not respect us. And it also shows that they are not a civilized people. If we do not act, they will become bolder. This is the time to show them who we really are." King Azfaran gazed at Zahil with a look of hesitation. However, those words sank into him, burning away any rational thoughts he once had. "We cannot let them insult us like this. We must act, Zahil. Arendelle must feel the proper revenge. My daughter's finger was cut like this. Even though she is an arrogant princess, she is still human. She is my daughter. They have insulted our royal family. We will give them a lesson they will never forget. I swear." Zahil smiled inwardly, though his face remained calm. This was the moment he had carefully planned. The emotional and anger-driven King Azfaran was the perfect tool to carry out the grand war plan. Zahil knew that once the Azfaran army set out, everything in their path would be destroyed. He also knew that even though the king planned to join the battle, Zahil would remain in the palace. He didn't want a victory on the battlefield. He wanted control over a far stronger Isvalon while Azfaran was away. King Azfaran immediately gathered his army. In no time, the decision was made. A force of 3,000 elite soldiers, mostly trained footmen, was prepared to march towards our. Meanwhile, another 1,000 soldiers would stay behind to guard the Isvalon kingdom, watching for any other potential threats that might arise. Internal conflict within Isvalon. Although the decision to attack Arendelle had been made, tension within the kingdom did not fade. Behind the spirit of the soldiers led by Azfaran, there were many silent voices, doubts growing in their hearts. Though none dared to speak openly in front of the king, among the royal officials, some had begun to sense that Isvalon, a kingdom long preserved with care, might now be destroying itself through reckless decisions. To veteran soldiers who had served the kingdom for many years, Shazwan and Raza stood in the shadow of the great hall, exchanging anxious glances. Shazwan, a warrior with over 2 decades of battle experience, shook his head, reminding himself that this was not the war they had hoped for. "Are we truly ready for this?" Shazwan asked in a quiet voice, his tone trembling, though he tried to stay calm. "Shafan acts out of anger, not good reason. We all know how his fury clouds his judgment, and we are the ones who will pay the price." Razak, younger, but less seasoned, looked up at the darkening sky, the weather mirroring their unease. "It's not easy, Shazwan," he replied carefully, "but what choice do we have? Sharfan is king. His command cannot be refused." Shazwan's voice became more hoarse, burdened with years of loyalty, now strained by doubt. "It's not about refusing. It's about what's right. What we're about to do could destroy us. We don't even know how Arendelle will respond. Are we truly prepared for a war that might last for years?" The two fell silent, but their worries lingered. There were others who shared the same quiet doubts, yet none were brave enough to speak them aloud. Within the ranks, a sense of unease was spreading. Some began to wonder, were they truly fighting for the glory of the kingdom, or for the ambitions of a king blinded by grief and pride? Back in the palace, other senior officials also felt the growing uncertainty. In one of the war chambers, a few of them spoke in hushed voices, cautious not to be overheard. "Are we truly sure about this plan?" one officer asked, his eyes staring out the tall window, as if seeking answers in the gray clouds. Zahil, the cunning advisor, who had long manipulated Sharfan's decisions, sensed the shift in mood. Though the order had been given, cracks were beginning to show in the kingdom's unity. He understood this was a critical moment. If doubt continued to spread, all he had carefully built might collapse. So, Zahil moved quickly to secure his grip, approaching several key officers and speaking words filled with promise. "Trust me," he said with a soft, calculated smile. "What we are doing is for the future of Isvalon. This is our moment to show the world our strength. We will prove we are not a kingdom to be mocked. This war will define who we are." But despite Zahil's words, the tension remained. Some of them knew in their hearts that they were standing at a dangerous crossroad. Then they could not predict what awaited them ahead. This decision could raise Isvalon to new heights, or pull it into a darkness from which it might never return. Meanwhile, in Arendelle, Azfaran and Marin were preparing for what was to come. Azfaran, always calm and wise, could feel the tension in the air. He knew that this battle was not just a physical test, but also a test of strength of mind and heart. Every decision made would determine the fate of their kingdom. Marin approached Azfaran, observing his calm expression, but behind his eyes was a seriousness that ran deep. "We can't let this pass," Marin said with a slightly trembling voice. "Sharfan will make a big move. We have to be ready." Azfaran nodded slowly, his sharp eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "We have to be ready for anything. We don't know how many will come, but we must fight with everything we have. We will stand, Marin, we will stand in the unseen battlefield, behind the increasingly prepared defenses." Both sides were ready to face the storm that had come, a storm that could either destroy them or raise them higher than ever before. War was not just about weapons, but about the strength of the heart, about resilience in the face of every blow. Back to Isvalon, Zahil could only smile silently. He knew that this chaos was the first step towards his mastery of his calling. He did not join the 3,000 soldiers of Sharfan marching to Arendelle. He argued that when the kingdom was left behind, someone in command was needed to lead in the king's absence. "King Sharfan, we mustn't be hasty. We can show our power to Arendelle by attacking them with great force. But don't forget about the kingdom's security," Zahil said. "Allow me to stay here and guard the security of Isvalon with the other 1,000 soldiers." Sharfan, in fury mode, with blood boiling, barely paid attention to Zahil's words. "It's up to you. What matters to me right now is teaching Arendelle a lesson in manners when they oppose me. I will leave with 3,000 soldiers and burn the young kingdom of Arendelle to the ground." The preparations didn't take long. The next morning, 3,000 soldiers from Isvalon set off for Arendelle, led directly by Sharfan, The king was driven by anger and manipulated by his advisor. The army, led by Sharfan himself, moved with burning determination. Their footsteps felt like an earthquake, the ground trembling under the power they carried. This decision was not just about war. For Sharfan, this was a war that would change everything. If they won, they would carve Iskelin's name to the peak of glory. But if they lost, everything they had fought for would be destroyed in an instant. Episode 20. The Blood Road to an Envy Lead under the scorching sun. The Iskelin army marched across the rocky terrain that stretched before them. They came in an uncountable number, lined up in long rows, their steps echoing with the clanging of weapons. The heavy air pressed down on their chests, but their spirits burned, driven by a deep-seated rage. King Sharfan, leading from the center of the army, moved quickly, his gaze fixed ahead, filled with hatred. No one can stop us. It's time for Arendelle to learn a lesson. We will destroy them, Sharfan shouted, his voice resounding in the ears of his soldiers, as though igniting a fierce fire in every warrior who heard him. He wasn't at the front as he usually was. His position, in the middle of the army, might seem like a sign that he was ready to protect them, but for Sharfan, it was a choice to keep his distance from the battlefield. A way of reminding himself that this wasn't just any battle. This was a war to avenge the insult he believed had been inflicted upon his kingdom and his daughter. Reiz ha. In his heart, Sharfan screamed Riza, his lost daughter, the child he had loved and protected. Despite her moral failings, now considered lost somewhere in Anveld, the package he had received, a small bundle with a severed finger, believed to belong to Riza, only fueled his rage. Those who torture my bloodline will feel my wrath. Without hesitation, King Sharfan had decided to strike Arendelle. There was no time to plan, no time to stop and think. Everything was driven by anger and pride. The Iskelin army continued its march, their spirits burning with fury, ready to obliterate Arendelle. Meanwhile, far in Arendelle, the kingdom's leaders already knew that the battle was about to begin. Marin, the military commander, known not only for her beauty but also her intellect, led her forces with an unshakable calm. She surveyed the battlefield with extraordinary focus. This isn't just about strength, it's about strategy. About how we'll trap them, Marin said calmly, speaking to the commanders around her. I've prepared everything. All the traps are set perfectly, one of the squad leaders replied, bowing his head in respect. Marin nodded. We'll let them advance deeper into our territory. But once they've gone too far, they'll regret it. Before the battle had even begun, Marin had planned everything meticulously. Although the Arendelle forces were fewer, with only around 2,300 soldiers, they would face the Iskelin army cleverly. Various traps had been set along the road to Anveld, the main city of Arendelle, as well as other key strategic points. Large trenches filled with spears and venomous snakes had been carefully dug in some paths. Sharp spikes were scattered and hidden beneath the straw, waiting to pierce the feet of those who were unaware. As the battle began, Marin stood tall on a high vantage point, observing Sharfan's forces advancing impatiently. Her eyes, there was a calmness that soothed the hearts of the soldiers under her command. It was as though she knew they were facing a formidable enemy, but the key was not in raw strength alone. This is a war of wit, not blind rage. Remember that, Marin said to her troops, preparing for the assault. Her voice was calm, yet filled with authority, reminding them of the greater purpose behind their fight, far beyond a mere fleeting victory. With tactics precise and deliberate, Marin's forces were ready for the onslaught. The air was tense with anticipation, and the ground seemed to hum with the promise of conflict. Her soldiers, trained in the art of patience, were as much prepared mentally as they were physically. Each of them understood that the battle ahead was not just about defeating an enemy, it was about outsmarting them. On the other side, the forces of Iskalin grew ever closer. Sharfan, positioned in the heart of his army, continued to shout commands, indifferent to the mounting losses beginning to show before him. The traps, meticulously set, was starting to take their toll on his lead troops. "Push forward," Sharfan yelled in a fury, his eyes blazing with fire. "They can't stop us. Don't let them toy with us." Yet, as his forces moved deeper into territory, the traps began to do their work. Large pits filled with stakes and venomous snakes tore through the front lines of his army. Many soldiers were caught, screaming in agony. "Help us! Medical teams! Hurry! Help us!" Some cried out, while others were beyond salvation. A commander approached King Sharfan, his face etched with worry. "Your Majesty, this is not a battlefield we can dominate with mere rage. They are prepared. We need to stop and regroup our strategy." Sharfan glared at the commander with seething hatred. "Stop! And what of my daughter? We will not stop. They are the ones who dared challenge us, and we will crush them even harder." Despite the growing casualties, almost a third of his forces either fallen or severely wounded, Sharfan stubbornly pressed forward, driving his army deeper into Irindale's land. His determination was unwavering, yet with each passing moment, a sense of unease grew among his commanders. They could all feel if the war could turn into a disaster, but none dared to question their king's orders. The next trap emerged. Large spikes scattered across the path wounded more of his soldiers, but Sharfan, enraged and impatient, still insisted on advancing. His heart was consumed by a single desire to annihilate Irindale. He glared ahead with eyes that could only be described as pure fury. "Irindale cowards. They think they can degrade us. They are only using traps to fight us. Too scared to face us head-on," roared King Sharfan, his arrogance evident. Suddenly, as they neared Anveld, the sharp sound of bowstrings snapping filled the air like the rushing wind slicing through glass. Arrows shot through the air with tremendous speed, striking down Isvalan's soldiers, who were caught off guard. Many fell, stumbling backward, screaming from their severe wounds. Among the chaos of the battlefield, Sharfan stood stunned. This was an unexpected attack. The scorching heat of the sun, the cries of agony, and the rising dust only heightened the growing sense of dread. Blood began to stain the ground, while fragile feet faltered and fell. The arrows from Irin forces fell like an unyielding storm, tearing into Isvalan's already exhausted troops, particularly those in the front. From the forefront of the Isvalan ranks, a young figure, surrounded by Irindale's high-ranking officers, prepared for the battle ahead. His gaze was sharp as he fixed it on Isvalan's lines. He was Azfaran, the man whom Sharfan had long wished to confront, the one responsible for uniting Irindale. Azfaran, alongside Kale and other high-ranking officers, had already positioned their cavalry, ready to block the path to Anveld. "Charge them," Sharfan shouted, his voice now sounding like the furious cry of a king losing control. However, Irindale's forces weren't just attacking with bows from the side and cavalry from the front. From behind, their well-trained footmen, hidden and ready, had set their sights on destroying the rear of Isvalan's ranks. "Now's the time. They're panicking and trapped. Footmen, advance, attack." Marin ordered. Sharfan stood in the center, feeling the panic spreading throughout his ranks. They were surrounded from the front, rear, and both sides. "Don't falter. Attack," Sharfan screamed, though a seed of doubt was beginning to take root in his heart. In an instant, Isvalan's forces, fractured and overwhelmed, began to retreat, attempting to hold their ground against the dual assaults, while the arrows rained down from unseen arches hidden in the rocky forests. Marin observed calmly from her position. "Now, we close in on them," she whispered to her subordinates. Her beautiful face remained resolute, though inside, she knew this battle would be a turning point for both kingdoms. "Don't give them a chance to retreat," Marin continued, her voice firm with resolve. "This is a war for justice and peace. If we win today, we can ensure peace, not only for our kingdom, but for all of Isvalan's forces." Now trapped in Irindale's snare, began to retreat in desperation. King Sharfan, gravely wounded, felt his legs grow heavy, his body battered, but he refused to surrender. He still craved the fight. Seeing the dire situation, one of the military commanders immediately took command to save the king. We need to pull back to the borders. Fall back. Save the king, he shouted. Though in his heart, he knew that this war would never be the same again. Isvalon had lost too many men. Only about 700 of Isvalan's soldiers remained, retreating hastily on horseback, abandoning many comrades trapped or dead on the battlefield. King Sharfan, don't leave us. Please, help us. Medica team shouted one of the soldiers stuck in the chaos, who had no horse to ride. Meanwhile, Marin surveyed the battlefield, now soaked in blood and littered with the dead. This victory belonged to Arendelle, but she knew it was just the beginning. We still have much to do, she thought to herself, realizing that the war was far from over, and many more battles lay ahead. Thus, the first battle of this great war came to a close. King Sharfan's forces, led directly by him, retreated with only remnants left. Sharfan escaped, but not unscathed, not with pride, only with his life and the growing fear that began to chase him. Azfaran took a deep breath, slowly unsheathing his sword. His gaze wasn't one of triumph, but of resolve. Don't give them time to regroup behind his walls, he said loudly to the commanders. Mara nodded, her eyes fixed to the east, sharp as a predator's gaze. Chase them, now, Azfaran added, and without celebration, without shouts of victory, Arendelle's forces began to move. Their march wasn't the closing step of the battle, but the beginning of the hunt. The sky had yet to darken, and the war was far from over. Episode 21, The Gate of Betrayal. After Sharfan and the remainder of his troops retreated to Isvalon, Azfaran quickly thought on his feet and gave orders. The command came while the scent of blood and wet earth still hung thick in the air. As standing in the middle of the battlefield with his senior officers, including Kale, issued instructions with a calm yet firm voice. His sharp gaze swept across the horizon, fading into the east toward his homeland, long occupied by the shadow of betrayal. Information and scouting units. Tell the heavy equipment troops to follow immediately. Battering rams, siege towers, climbing ladders, everything. We don't know how far Sharfan will run, but we know where he's heading, said Azfaran. And also bring that spoiled Princess Ryza to follow us to Isvalon, he added. Understood, my king. We're on it. The information and scout units swiftly moved, cutting through thickets, plains, and hilly terrain to deliver the message to the Heavy Equipment Division and the Special Forces assigned to escort Ryza as a prisoner. They rode on with fast, carefully selected horses. No one was to be left behind. No message could be missed. Kale, one of the elite cavalry commanders, stood beside Azfaran, his expression unchanged since the first war began. His eyes scanned the horizon, as though reading the enemy's intent from the wind. We'll capture him before the gates of Isvalon open for him, said Kale. They rode eastward, a direction fit only for a coward trying to hide behind the walls of his own kingdom. At the border of Isvalon, the land began to change. The trees grew less, the roads rougher, and the wind colder. But Sharfan's trail was clear, like bloodstains on snow. Sharfan ran like a demon chased by angels. His robe was soaked in dust and blood, his face covered in wounds. Yet fear gave him more strength than any sword. He knew he couldn't fight, but he hoped to hide. He hoped the gates of Isvalon would open quickly, let him inside, and allow him to strike back at Arendelle's forces from the fortress towers. But hope is a blade's edge. When Sharfan finally arrived before Isvalon's main gate, a great, steel-layered door etched with the sigil of the kingdom he once ruled, he raised his hands and shouted with near desperation, "Open the gate, it's me, your king has returned. Quickly, ... Arendelle is still chasing us." From above the gate, a face he knew all too well appeared. Zahil, the royal advisor, now acting as interim king, stood with a robe threaded in gold, his expression cold, his eyes full of cunning. He looked down on Sharfan, like a judge facing a condemned man. "In the name of the kingdom's safety and the people of Isvalon, the gate shall not be opened for anyone who brings war to these sacred walls," declared loudly Zahil. "What do you mean? It's me, I'm your king. I fought for this throne. Open the main gate now, said Sharfan. But Zahil only shrugged, as one discarding a burden he never wanted in the first place. Without another word, he disappeared behind the tower. The gate remained shut. Cold steel eyes stared down at Sharfan without mercy. Azfaran and his forces arrived not long after, the dust of war still dancing behind them. They surrounded Sharfan and his small force of barely 700 men. There was no way back, no door to enter, no hand to pull them inside. Once more, Sharfan turned his head toward the main gate. Hey, soldiers, ... Open the gate now. Don't listen to Zahil. I'm your king. The Isvalon guards, stationed at the main gate, looked confused, unsure whom to obey. On one hand, many had grown tired of Sharfan's arrogance as king, but on the other, Zahil was a cunning man. There was no winning side for the soldiers of Isvalon. Kao dismounted and looked Azfaran in the eye. He has no choice left. Azfaran nodded. They will fight, but without hope. Then, the horn sounded sharp and sorrowful, like the last cry of a dying sky. A small but brutal battle was about to erupt before the gates of his very gates that now stood as silent witnesses to betrayal. Both Sharfan and Azfaran commanded cavalry troops on this battlefield. But unlike Sharfan's, Azfaran's cavalry from Arendelle came in two distinct forces, those armed with swords and those trained with bows. This advantage, subtle but deadly, became the very key Azfaran would use to strike first. Cavalry, archers attack Sharfan's front lines. Rain your arrows upon them, Azfaran roared. Sharfan scrambled to respond. Shields up. Keep them high and run toward them. Don't give their archers any space. Attack. The battle erupted. Dust rose. Screams tore through the air. Blades clashed against shields in a rhythm of chaos. Blood spilled across the ancient stones that once bore the footsteps of Isvalon's former kings. But this was no ordinary clash. It was a dance of shadows and discipline. The cavalry of Arendelle moved with eerie precision, split into two formations, like twin wings of a bird. The sword riders surged forward, steel flashing in the dying light, while the archers curved along the flanks, their arrows already notched and ready. No sudden charge, Azfaran murmured, almost to himself. Let them stretch thin. Let them believe they see an opening. They're baiting our archers, you know, Kao said as he rode beside him. But they have no idea that they are the prey. Azfaran gave a slight nod. The trap was drawn with their greed. Now it will close with their panic. It was a rhythm they had trained for months to perfect. And now, upon the open field, before the gates of Isvalon, it came alive. Arrows flew not in chaos, but in waves that timed themselves between the gallop of hooves and the clash of steel. As the front lines of Sharfan's forces raised their shields to block, a second volley struck from a different angle. Confusion spread. Formations broke. Do you see it, Kao? Azfaran's voice sharpened. They're left of their vanguard, too slow to cover the archers' arrows. I'll dispatch riders 3 to split through. Good. Keep the archers moving. I want them to feel the wind and never the source. The sound was not of war, but of thunder-controlled, relentless, echoing like drums against the city walls. Azfaran's archers never stood still. They moved like tides, circling, striking, and fading before Sharfan's men could counterattack. One of the younger commanders, barely past 20, turned his horse and called out, "They're running, should we press harder, my lord?" Azfaran lifted his hand calmly. "Not yet. Never chase a falling wave. Just guide it. Let them scatter themselves, trying to strike a ghost." At the center, the sword-bearing cavalry pushed through narrow breaches, targeting commanders and standard-bearers, knowing that a faltering banner could unravel morale faster than blood ever would. The technique had a name in Arendelle, the sickle path, where one half cuts and the other clears. Azfaran, Kao called, urgency in his voice. Sharfan is redirecting his second flank. He's trying to force a wall against our rear line. Then, collapse inward, Azfaran responded. Let the wall become their coffin. Send the archers behind them. I want no escape." Sharfan's shouts became more desperate. His front line pressed too hard, too soon, trying to reach the archers' butt. Every step forward exposed their rear. The battlefield had become a trap. Kale, eyes gleaming with the fire of battle, leaned toward Azfaran. This is the end of him. His soldiers fight without breath. Their swords fall heavier than their will. Azfaran, still composed, whispered, to no one in particular, "This is not a victory yet. This is a reckoning. Let every arrow remind them of the oath they broke." From the watchtower, even Zahil paused, eyes narrowing as he watched Azfaran's strategy unfold like ink on parchment. It was not brute force, it was art, and in that art, Sharfan was bleeding, seated on an ivory-carved chair on the watchtower. He sipped red wine that caught the glint of the setting sun. A quiet laugh escaped his lips. He began to hum a soft, childlike melody, as if playing with chess pieces no one else could see. White pieces strike, black pieces retreat, and the king falls, unloved. To him, this was no longer about power, it was about a game. One he played with finer threads than anyone could weave. Two men of Isvalon, two bloodlines born of the same soil, killing one another, while he remained untouched atop a throne he had not yet fully claimed, had pitted two serpents in one cage, and now all he had to do was wait to see which one would die first. No arrows were loosed from within the walls. No help was sent. Zahil let Sharfan fall like a sorcerer who sets the fire, then quietly watches the smoke rise. "I merely planted the seed," he murmured. "They chose to become thorns and daggers." He watched Sharfan's army collapse, as if witnessing a play he himself had written from the very first act. The battle didn't last long. Azfaran's forces, greater in number and superior in discipline, methodically broke through the resistance. Sharfan fought like a wounded tiger, but his body could no longer follow the madness of his ambition. Within hours, it was over. Sharfan was captured live. The hands that once gripped a royal scepter were now bound in chains of iron. His head hung low, his face bloodied, yet his eyes still burned with an ember of vengeance that refused to die. Azfaran stared at him for a long time, not with hatred, but with a pain that felt ancient. Between them, there was blood, there was history, and a future shattered by the wrong choices of a single man. "You will live, Sharfan," Azfaran said quietly, "but not to rule. You will live to witness the ruin you've wrought. And the people of Isvalon, they will decide your fate." Kale had already begun binding the Isvalon's high-ranking officers who had sworn loyalty to Sharfan. Some of them begged for mercy, but it was far too late. For now, they would remain tied, awaiting judgment from the two kingdoms. Yet behind this hard-won victory, a shadow still loomed. Zahil was still in the tower. His smile remained, but within that smile was something darker, something even the skies had not yet seen. This advisor, cunning and quiet, could prove to be more dangerous than Sharfan ever was. Azfaran, aware of the venom masked by Zahil's eloquence, turned to Kale and spoke with a wary tone. "That man, when he came to Arendelle with his talk of peace, our elders warned me. They said his face could not be trusted. We must be careful." Episode 22. Negotiation. The evening sky above Isvalon shimmered in hues of copper. The clouds drifted slowly, like a procession of ancient souls, witnessing, once more, the foolishness of mankind. In the distance, the tallest tower of fortress stood like a spear, piercing the heavens. There, Zahil stood, at the peak of the watchtower. He laughed, a cold, soulless laugh. He watched the chaos unfold between two true heirs of the kingdom of Isvalon. From afar, Azfaran looked up, eyes squinting against the glare of the setting sun. The laughter, though faint, struck his heart like a thorn. He said nothing. His left hand clenched slowly as the desert wind played with his worn, yet noble cloak. Zahil. That is not the laughter of a leader. It is the laughter of an executioner who has found a new toy. He thought silently. Kale, the military commander, stood beside him, eyes also fixed on the tower, before glancing at Azfaran. "You see it too, don't you?" he asked quietly. Azfaran nodded. Zalil, he's not a fool. That's what makes him dangerous. A tyrant with a sharp mind is deadlier than 1,000 soldiers. Marin approached, leading a horse and carrying the latest report from the guards. The siege equipment from Irondale has arrived, and my troops they've joined the southern line. We can start setting up camp for the night. Good, Kale replied. But we hold a council tonight. I won't sleep peacefully, knowing Zalil still rules behind those walls. Azfaran's eyes rested on the great gates of Isvalon, now tightly sealed by the remnants of the army under Zalil's command. He knew that if they didn't make a decision tonight, tomorrow they would face more than steel walls. They would face a hell forged from human arrogance. ***. Night fell like a dark Valsoff, but heavy with threats. Inside the main tent, Irondale's military leaders gathered. Torchlight flickered in every corner, casting restless shadows on their faces. Azfaran sat cross-legged at the center, Kale to his right, Marin to his left. Before them, a map of Isvalon, battle documents, and fragments of doubt. I once believed he was the only Isvalon official who thought with reason, untainted by ambition. Azfaran began. His voice waited. Maer nodded gently. I used to think he was just stubborn, but when I saw him today, there was something in his eyes. Something I can't put into words. Cunning, added Kale, but not the ordinary kind. The kind that turns entire kingdoms into civil wars. Azfaran sighed. I saw Sharfan in Zolil's laughter, but worse. A younger, sharper version of him. Maybe even crueler. If he rules Isvalon, this continent will spiral into the same cycle again. One of Irondale's commanders spoke. Do we have enough proof to accuse him in front of the Isvalon soldiers? They might still see him as a hero for securing the city. That's why we must speak to them directly. As answered, bring in the war prisoners. Let us hear it from their own mouths. Several prisoners were brought into the main tent. Their faces were weary, some wounded, but no longer defiant. They were former Isvalon troops who had once served under Zahl. An older man with a gash on his temple stepped forward before Azfaran. Your name? Kale asked Kadam. My lord, I want you to speak plainly. Kadam, what do you know about Zalil? Kadam bowed his head for a moment, then raised it, his eyes heavy with tears. He is no leader, my lord. He is a shadow that crept into the light, he said quietly. Azfaran leaned forward. Explain, Kadam. What do you mean Zalil does not kill with a sword, but with whispers? He doesn't curse in public, but traps in silence. Many of our officers suddenly vanished, accused of treason after uttering just a few words. We didn't know where the rumors came from until we realized that every wall in Isvalon might be his ears. The tent fell silent. He infected our trust, made us suspect one another. Allies turned traitors simply because he willed it. Even the royal advisors became puppets in his scheme. Kale clenched his fist. So, he's not just ambitious. No, Kadam answered. He is a planner. Deceptive, patient, always waiting for the right moment. We believe even Sharfan's downfall was crafted by him long ago. He waited for the storm so he could appear as a savior. Kale lowered his head, grinding his teeth. Marin covered her face with her hands. Azfaran sat in silence. If he becomes king, Kadam said, what Sharfan did will look like a child's game. He could be far worse. After the prisoners were escorted out, the tent returned to stillness. Azfaran stood. We can't allow this. The people of Isvalon need a leader, but not from among the elites. So what's your plan? Marin asked. We negotiate. We offer a deal. We return Princess Ryza, even Sharfan, but on one condition. The throne must be decided by the people, not by officials or politicians. And if he refuses, Kale asked. Azfaran stared at the silhouette of Isvalon's fortress beyond the tent. Then we tear down that fortress, stone by stone. The night sky had not fully vanished when Azfaran stepped out of the main tent. A soft mist blanketed the field, and in the distance, the high walls of Isvalon loomed like an unmoving shadow silhouette, but threatening. Asterisk around the dying campfires, soldiers were already awake. Some packing gear, others whispering morning prayers. In that quiet moment, Azfaran's footsteps echoed between the tents. Merrin and Kale were already waiting in the camp's center, joined by several Arendelle generals. Azfaran stopped before them, gaze fixed on the towering fortress. "We send a message," he said. Kale nodded, cautious. "Negotiation, not just negotiation. It's our final offer before we turn this ground to dust." Merrin looked at him intently. "Who will you send?" "One officer, 2 guards, and 1 box." "Box," Kale echoed. "Inside, tokens of honor, the peace accord. We will return Princess Ryza and King Sharfan alive, as promised. That is our moral strength. We're not butchers like them." Azfaran turned to Kale. "Even if the world sees us as a tribe from Arendelle, we have an honor that no blood can buy. In return, Zalil must allow the people to choose their ruler," he added. Merrin stepped closer, voice a whisper. "And if they refuse?" "If Zalil refuses," Azfaran said firmly, "then tomorrow, we will not stand outside Escalin's walls. We will stand on top of them." He turned to an aide. "Choose someone calm and noble. Someone who can carry this message without being provoked. This envoy will define the face of our war." The aide bowed deeply and rushed off. Azfaran took a deep breath. For a moment, his eyes wandered to the pale morning sky, and in that silence, he prayed, not for victory, but that in every choice he made, his people would still have a future one, not wrapped in vengeance. As the sun rose, Arendelle's army stood in formation. From the front line, an envoy departed. 3 horses, 1 officer, 2 guards, and a long wooden box. Inside a treaty, and 2 names, Reizihi, and Sharfan. They would be returned. Even Sharfan would walk free, if Zalil agreed to relinquish the throne and let the people choose. Asterisk. 2 hours later, the envoy arrived at the gate. They were received coldly by Iscalan soldiers, welcomed into the main gate, but there was no formal reception, no discussion, only silence. 2.5 hours passed. Then, from the top of Iscalan's tower, a pole was raised. At its tip, the severed heads of the Arendelle envoy. Blood dripped, falling like the first drops of winter rain. Below it, Zoli's voice thundered arrogant, cruel. "Let the world know. The throne of Iscalan is not negotiable. If you want war, bring everything you've got. I will be waiting at the top of this tower." He believed Arendelle could never breach Iscalin's towering walls, even if he had only 1,000 troops left inside. No one spoke as the envoys' heads appeared atop the fortress, mounted on a steel pike. The morning wind swept across pale faces. A young man on the right flank dropped his spear, knees buckling. Beside him, a mountain tribeswoman covered her face, holding back tears. Maer held her breath, eyes wide with horror, unable to look away. Kale clenched his jaw, staring wordlessly. In the center of the line, Azfaran stood tall, but his eyes were dim. He didn't move. He didn't blink. Only his breath remained heavy, as if each inhale was a reminder that diplomacy was dead, and war was now inevitable. Later that night, Azfaran sat outside his tent, watching the fire. His face was hard, but his eyes were wet. Merrin approached. "Are you sad, of course?" "I am. Those heads should be a peacemakers. And Azfaran said softly, "Because I truly hoped this war could be avoided, that we wouldn't lose more lives. Some souls are born to burn," Merrin said. Kale joined them. "And some towers are built only to be destroyed." Azfaran looked at them both. "Tomorrow, we begin. The war isn't over. But this time, it's not just about a throne. It's about the final hope of Iscalan, of Arendelle, and even of Isvalon." He rose. The night wind blew stronger, carrying the scent of earth, blood, and history. In the distance, the shadow of the fortress still stood. But that night, in everyone's heart, a decision had already been made. That tower must fall. Episode 23, A Message for Change. The night air in Isvalon was cold and sharp. Many guards were on duty, guarding the fortress. But at the same time, something secret was happening. Two dark hooded figures moved quickly in the shadows of the stone walls, sneaking quietly, like they didn't belong to this world. They were messengers, sent by someone whose name was still whispered with respect by the oppressed people of Isvalon. Father, a former palace guard during the time of the kind King Selim. Now, he was the brain behind the people's resistance. An old man with a calm face but sharp eyes, who never lost his way even in the dark. Father, Nazma, and their group had been waiting a long time for this moment. We must succeed. For them, whispered one of the messengers, a pale young man who kept his head down, holding a small scroll to his chest. Father said, "If we fail, that gate will stay closed forever," replied his partner, a young woman with eyes full of belief. They carried the most important message since the Irondale army began to surround Isvalon, a secret path, an old tunnel built long ago by King Selim, to be used only in emergencies. A narrow path not wide enough for a big army, but enough to make a difference in a critical time. The two messengers had never used that tunnel before. But now, thanks to Father, they could escape from the fortress in darkness by following it. Before they left, they were ordered to swear that they would keep the tunnel a secret forever. It could only be used in a time of great danger. As the dawn broke and the sky changed from the dark of night to a soft golden orange, the two hooded figures moved fast through the narrow tunnel, hidden behind old stones. The path twisted under rocks and roots, forgotten by time and unknown to Shafans or Zahil's soldiers. Carefully, the messengers stepped through tight spaces between rocks, past silent bushes that hid them from any watching eyes. Sweat ran down their faces, not just from the walk, but from fear. One wrong sound could mean death. They carried only one water pouch, a piece of bread, and a letter wrapped in leather. Inside the letter was a small map and a secret message. There is a way, a narrow path that can bring change. Use the door that has been forgotten. It took them almost half the night to go from inside Isvalon to the edge of Irondale camp. Sometimes, they had to hide behind rocks when Isvalon patrols passed, crouch among thorny bushes, or hold their breath when they heard horses nearby. Finally, they saw torches flickering at Irondale's temporary camp far ahead. The young man, bleeding from his leg, almost fell to the ground in relief. They were nearly there. For a moment, it felt like the world opened. Birds began to sing softly. The morning air brought hope, but that hope didn't last. They didn't know that Zahil's soldiers had secretly surrounded the area the day before. They were watching Irondale's movements. This wasn't a normal war. This was a war of strategy, tricks, and information. Before the messengers could reach Irondale's scouts, 3 riders on black horses came out of the morning fog. There was no time to run. One of the messengers tried to fire a final arrow from his short bow. Attached to the arrow was the message from Father's resistance group, hoping Irondale would see it. But that morning may have been the last morning those 2 messengers would ever see. The riders caught up to them. They tried to escape, but the Isvalon scouts were faster on horseback and more experienced. The messengers were captured alive, gagged, tied up, and dragged back to the fortress. On the way, they kept saying the names Azfaran and King Selim, begging that their message might reach someone outside. What they didn't know was that Irondale's spies, hiding in the forest, had seen them. The scouts found the arrow with the message from Father still tied to it. The message had been delivered. The news had reached its destination, but it did not save Father's messengers. The Irondale scouts quietly brought the letter to Azfaran in his tent and told him that the messengers were caught by Isvalon soldiers earlier that morning. A few hours later, daylight filled the sky. Behind the walls of the Isvalon fortress, the bodies of the 2 messengers were hanging at the main gate. Their clothes moved in the wind, and dried blood marked their faces. The head of the younger one was placed high on the gate tower as a warning. Their message had arrived, but the price they paid would never be forgotten by those who saw their faces one last time. Azfaran watched in silence. Inside his chest, a storm, double quotes, ZA Hill, ... You have truly killed the last honor left in Isvalon, he whispered quietly. Marin stood beside him, her jaw tight. We must act now. There's no more space for talks. Kale, standing behind them, clenched his fists. If we let this pass, ... we let fear become king. Inside the main strategy tent, the Arendelle Military Council had gathered. The tension was like a tight bowstring, ready to snap. Zahil has stained the name of Isvalon, said one of commander. Even Salim, if he was still alive, would tear the crown off his heir's head. Azfaran stood in the center, his eyes looking at every face around him. We are not fighting we are fighting the corruption, the lies, and the darkness inside it. Its people are our brothers. Their blood is our blood. But its army under Zahil and Sharfani's poison. Everyone nodded. Then Azfaran pointed to a small mark on the map, the south side of the fortress. This path, the secret tunnel built by King Selim long ago, has been found. Father leader of the resistance inside Isvalon sent messengers to tell us about it before they were silenced. Father, asked one commander, surprised. Double quotes. Yes. He was once Salim's personal guard. Now, he is their last hope. The people of Isvalon. Silence filled the room. Then Marin spoke. Let me lead the infiltration team. We will open the main gate from the inside and make sure the people do not suffer in this war. Azfaran nodded. You'll go through the secret path tonight. Meanwhile, we will strike the main gate. Let them divide their focus. Episode 24. The First Breach. The next morning, the sky was still dark when the sound of war drums broke the silence. It was deep, loud, and slow at first. Dumb, ... Then faster, until it shook the ground. The land of Isvalon felt the tremble. Birds flew in panic, and the wind carried the warning of war across the valley. The army of Arendelle moved forward like a great river of steel. Thousands of soldiers walked in long lines, their shields shining in the morning light, their spears pointing like a forest ready to strike. The rhythm of their boots matched the war drums. Step by step, they closed the distance to the great walls of Iskhal and Dot. At the very front, a huge wagon rolled slowly. Its front was shaped like a beast's head, made of dark metal. Its roof was covered in layers of thick steel. This was their giant battering ram built, not just to knock on doors, but to break through the strongest gates in the world. Flames from nearby torches danced on its armor, making it look alive. Above, on a rocky hill not far from the battlefield, Azfaran stood in silence. The wind blew through his dark robe, making it flutter like a flag. His eyes watched everything, every movement of the troops, every sound of the drums, every step of fate. He placed one hand on his chest and whispered a prayer. Father, may your plan guide us to the path of change. Down below, horns were blown, the first sign of war. Then swish. An arrow flew from the top of the wall. It sliced through the air and hit a soldier's shield. Then came another, and another. In seconds, the sky was full of arrows, hundreds, then thousands flying down like a storm of sharp rain. The footmen of Arendelle reacted fast. They raised their shields above their heads and to their sides, forming a tight wall around the battering ram. It looked like a giant shell, made of people and iron. The sound of arrows hitting shields filled the air. Thud, thud, thud. Still, the ram moved forward, pushed by strong men under heavy fire. Then Kale appeared. His armor was dusty from the march, and his eyes sharp. He walked quickly toward Azfaran, ignoring the arrows that fell near him. Your Majesty, Kale said, his voice serious. We cannot stay under these arrows for long. My men are exposed. Let me lead the latter troops and try to take the walls. Azfaran turned his gaze to the walls of Isvalon. They were tall, thick, and guarded by archers who fired without rest. He knew the danger. Climbing under fire was like walking into death. But then he looked into Kale's eyes. There was no fear, the fire. He nodded slowly. Do it, but make sure you stay alive. That's not a request, it's an order. Kale gave a small smile. It was the smile of a man who had made peace with death. I'll return with victory, or not return at all. He turned and ran back to his men. All at once, loud calls rang out. Soldiers moved quickly, pulling long wooden ladders from carts. Others brought tall siege towers, wooden giants on wheels, with stairs inside and shields on the outside. The archers on Isvalan's wall saw this and rained down more arrows, hoping to stop them. But the Irondale troops kept moving. Their shields were soaked in blood, but they did not break. Kale reached the front. His voice rose above the chaos. Climbers, with me, up the ladders. The wall must fall. With a cry of war, the first group placed ladders against the stone walls. Kale was among the first to climb. Arrow after arrow passed near him, but he did not stop. Higher and higher, he climbed till his hand reached the top edge of the wall. The defenders waited, Isvalan's elite guards, with sharp blades and cold eyes, but even they were surprised by how fast Kale's troops came. Steel met steel, swords clashed, shields broke, men screamed. On top of the wall, the real battle had begun. It was close, dirty, and full of madness. There was no space to run, only space to fight. Some soldiers fell from the wall to their deaths. Others pushed forward, covered in cuts, shouting their king's name. Blood stained the white stones. The wall of Isvalan had become a place of chaos. Kale fought like a man who had no fear. His blade moved with power and purpose. Around him, his men fought hard to hold their ground. Every inch of stone was won by sweat and blood. Now, Zahil's troops were in panic mode. Their focus divided. Kale's troops fought on top of the Great Wall, and down below. The battering rams still moved forward, protected by the living tunnel of shields, knocking the Isvalan's main gate. Again and again, the war for Isvalan had truly begun. The south side of the fortress, while metal clashed and war cries echoed from the north side of Isvalan's fortress. Maren stood in quiet, but this quiet made her feel uneasy. Behind the low hills facing the southern wall of Isvalan, she stood still, her eyes fixed on the shadows of the city's towers in the distance. She was not holding a sword this time, but a rough map and old notes from Fada, former royal guard who knew every secret path in the walls of Isvalan. He had told her about a secret way, built long ago by King Selim in case of emergencies. Maren was planning a strategy that could only be done once, and it had to be perfect. If Father's information is right, she whispered, the secret gate on the south wall will not be guarded during the war, because none of the modern Isvalan soldiers know it exists. Her hand pointed at some spots on the map. Her eyes checked everything again and again. She knew one small mistake, and her whole group would vanish in the shadows of the city walls. One by one, she chose the soldiers to go with her. About 70 people, no more. Scouts she trusted, who could move silently through foggy forests. Some footmen from Kale's front line, who were fast and strong if skirmish happened. And 8 archers from Elzar Valley, who could shoot a bird in the sky from far away through morning fog. No one was chosen because of rank, only for skill. The afternoon turned into evening, and shadows grew longer in their small camp. In the middle of their quiet preparations, footsteps slowly came from behind her. It was Azfaran. How are your preparations? Azfaran asked calmly, but his eyes showed worry. Maren turned and answered softly, we're only waiting for night to cover the city. The sneaking path is ready. My people are preparing. Azfaran walked closer and looked at the map. Kale already started the attack on the north side. That will get their attention. But it also means your time is short. Maren nodded slowly. We have only one chance. If we fail, we will have to fight without knowing anything about what's inside the city. Azfaran asked, then, can you begin this mission soon? Maren looked at the wall, now touched by the evening fog. Then she looked at Azfaran, her eyes strong. I will enter tonight. Her voice was calm, but sharp enough to cut through doubt. I'm ready.